Welcome to JK Tells a Story, where real-life dramas unfold. Sit back and enjoy today's tale. Consider this. In major events, it's often the small details that can make or break them. Take, for instance, the 1986 Challenger disaster, where a cheap O-ring led to the loss of 7 lives and hundreds of millions of dollars. Similarly, a tiny blood clot, barely visible under a microscope, can be fatal by blocking blood flow to a critical part of the brain. Even a small patch of ice on an Ohio highway can cause a vehicle to spin out of control and result in a deadly crash. The list goes on and on. Seemingly insignificant factors can have devastating consequences for significant endeavors. Marriage certainly falls into the category of important undertakings. I, for one, hold my marriage in high regard. Married for just over 8 years to my lovely wife Sarah. We have 2 amazing boys, Tyler and Brandon. While I didn't earn a college degree, my skills as an automotive technician have provided us with a comfortable life in a spacious home here in Dayton. Despite the long hours I put into my job at Hayes Automotive, the financial stability it brings makes it all worthwhile. My marriage has always been the highlight of my life, and I've worked diligently to support my family. Unfortunately, it's often the small things that can unravel such significant commitments. In my case, it was a tiny blood vessel in my brain that caused the downfall. Its proximity to another vessel led to swelling, triggering a debilitating migraine headache. I experienced one such episode on a particularly fateful October day in 2023. The symptoms were familiar: sensitivity to light, escalating sounds, and unbearable smells. The sudden onset of excruciating pain caught me off guard. Without my Imitrex inhaler, I had no means to alleviate the agony. While I had pills on hand, they weren't as effective and would take time to ease the pain to a manageable level, rendering me unable to work. I stumbled into my boss Bob's office and delivered the grim news. Bob Hayes had been running his automotive shop for over 2 decades, and he immediately sprang into action, summoning his secretary Linda and instructing her to get me home safely. "For heaven's sake, Mike, you're not driving in this condition. Linda, get him home now," he urged with genuine concern. With Linda's assistance, Bob carefully guided me out of the office and down the hallway toward the exit. Once outside, Linda helped me lean against the brick wall, shielding my eyes from the harsh October sunlight as she made her way to her car. I kept my eyes shut tightly and pressed my hands against my temples, trying to dull the throbbing pain. As we drove through the familiar streets of Dayton's Belmont neighborhood, passing the old Delco plant and heading toward the Oakwood area, my vision blurred and the light became unbearable, forcing me to keep my eyes shut. The sounds around me turned into an overwhelming buzz, and every scent made my stomach churn. Thankfully, Linda knew the way to our house on Maple Ridge Drive, so I didn't need to give directions. It felt like an eternity, but eventually she pulled up outside my home. Linda helped me out of the car and guided me inside. I followed her lead, barely able to walk on my own. Once in the kitchen, I instructed Linda to retrieve my inhaler from the refrigerator. She placed it in my hand and held it steady as I administered it into my nose, inhaling deeply as the medication entered my bloodstream. Then I asked her to assist me to the living room adjacent to the kitchen and help me onto the sofa. I requested that she draw the blinds and turn off all the lights, which she promptly did. After a few minutes, I could already sense some relief creeping in, so I assured Linda that she could leave. Gratefully, I thanked her for her help and welcomed the peace and quiet as she departed. I must have drifted off to sleep quickly as the pain eased, because I woke later to the sound of voices. The room was shrouded in darkness, signaling that it was likely later in the day. When I recalled my surroundings, I instantly realized the pain had vanished, leaving me feeling sore but relieved from the remnants of the migraine. Taking a moment to sit up cautiously, I waited, half expecting the pain to return. But it didn't. In the dimness, I recognized the voices of my wife Sarah and her neighbor friend Jessica Martinez. It seemed they were unaware of my presence, given the darkness and the still-off lights. Perhaps Sarah assumed I was still at work, since Linda had driven me home. She probably hadn't realized I was here at all. Maybe I could surprise them both. I rose quietly, planning to sneak to the door and then make my presence known. But as I tuned into their conversation, something made me freeze in place. "Come on, Sarah, how was it? Was it as good as before? Give me the details, girl." "It was amazing, Jess. I felt like I was in heaven, even better than last time. I swear. Almost mind-blowing. The best experience ever. Better than with Mike. Better than my husband. Better than with your husband? Really?" "Absolutely. I love Mike dearly, but he's never made me feel that way. Never. I mean, if I asked him to, well, he'd think I'd lost my mind. But David, he knows what I need, and I like it. Can't wait for next time." My heart stopped. David? Who was David? I felt the blood drain from my face as the reality of what I was hearing sank in. "Aren't you afraid Mike will find out? Have you considered the consequences? Mike will never know, and even if he did, so what? He's too nice to leave me. He wouldn't risk losing the kids. I'd take them in a heartbeat with a good lawyer. This isn't like you, Sarah. It's worrying. I think you're making a big mistake. I love Mike truly, but I won't give up what I have with David. I want both, the passion with David and the love with Mike. I need both, and I won't let go." I'd heard enough. Though the migraine had subsided, the ache in my heart was far worse. It gripped me so tightly that my stomach knotted, and each breath felt like a struggle. A ringing filled my ears, and my pulse thundered in my head. Fear surged through me as if a heart attack loomed, and I clung to the door frame until some semblance of calm returned to my body. Still, I kept my presence hidden, but with each returning moment of control, fury simmered within me, threatening to boil over. With resolve, I straightened and stepped into the illuminated kitchen, shattering the silence. Jessica was the first to notice me, her eyes widening in shock as she fell silent. Sarah, catching Jessica's reaction, turned to see me. Her expression shifted from contentment to astonishment, then to dread, and finally to anger, all in an instant. Pushing her chair back, Sarah rose to confront me. "How much did you hear? Why were you lurking and spying on me?" she demanded. I met her gaze in silence, then glanced at Jessica, who wasted no time in excusing herself. "I need to go. Kevin and I can take care of the boys if you need time. I'll call you later," she said before hurrying out the side door. I watched her departure wordlessly. Left alone, I turned my attention back to Sarah, once the woman I cherished unconditionally for 8 blissful years. 8 years I thought would stretch into eternity, where we'd grow old together. But tonight, that expectation shattered. There would be no forever for us. Sarah ended it all tonight. Where are the boys? What were you up to while you were having your fun with your lover? Did you even think about them? Or were you too busy enjoying yourself with someone else while leaving them unattended? Now I'm composed and collected. The pain still lingers, sharp and deep. It'll take a while for it to ease. Sarah's face twisted with anger, masking her beauty with ugliness. Perhaps that mask was the real Sarah, hidden beneath the surface all along. She retorted, "The boys are with Amanda Bennett. Jessica and I went shopping and Kevin watched over them. And I wasn't with anyone else, just Jessica." With that statement, she seemed to feel victorious. The anger on her face morphed into satisfaction. Finally realizing I'd been at home, she inquired, "What are you doing here? Where's your car? And why were you sitting in the dark? Were you spying on me? Trying to catch me in the act?" I came home early with a terrible migraine. Bob asked Linda to drive me home because I couldn't handle the light. I took my Imitrex and fell asleep. I've been here ever since. A queasiness etched in my stomach, and a strong urge to vomit surged through me. I rose and hurried to the bathroom. "Your voices woke me, and now I'm sick," I muttered as I departed. When I returned, Sarah was cleaning up the coffee cups and putting things away, acting as though nothing had happened. She moved about with deliberate casualness, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. "I suppose you think you heard something incriminating," she said without looking at me. "I heard enough, Sarah. I know about David." Her hands stilled for a moment, then continued their movements. "You don't know anything, Mike. You're being paranoid. David Richardson, junior associate at Lincoln Rice Homes downtown. I know exactly who he is." The color drained from her face, and she turned to look at me with genuine surprise. She had underestimated me, and we both knew it. "Mike, listen, it's not what you think." "It's not what I think?" My voice rose for the first time since this whole nightmare began. "You just told Jessica that you love what you have with him, that you want both him and me, that you'll take the kids if I try to leave. What exactly did I misunderstand?" Sarah's entire demeanor shifted then, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Cold calculation mixed with contempt. "Fine. Yes, I've been seeing David. And you know what, Mike? I'm not sorry. You want to know why? Because you've become predictable. Boring. You come home, watch TV, eat dinner, go to bed. When's the last time you surprised me with anything? When's the last time you made me feel like a woman instead of just a mother and housekeeper?" Her words hit me like physical blows, but I managed to stay standing. "So this is my fault?" "I never said it was your fault, but you're not exactly innocent either. David makes me feel alive again. He makes me feel beautiful, desired, passionate. When's the last time you did that? And our sons? What about Tyler and Brandon? Did you think about them while you were feeling so alive and passionate? Don't you dare bring our children into this. I'm a good mother and you know it. This has nothing to do with them." "It has everything to do with them, Sarah. Everything we've built here, everything we've worked for, you're willing to risk all of it for what? A few exciting afternoons?" Sarah's eyes flashed dangerously. "You want to know the truth, Mike? Here it is. I'm not giving up David. And if you can't handle that, then maybe you should think real hard about what you're willing to lose. Because if you push this, if you try to force me to choose, I'll take everything. The house, the boys, everything you've worked for. I'll make sure you lose it all." The words hung in the air between us like a toxic cloud. This wasn't the woman I'd married 8 years ago, the woman who'd promised to love me in sickness and in health, for better or worse. This was a complete stranger wearing Sarah's face. Is that a threat? It's a reality check. You're a good man, Mike, but you're not a fighter. You won't battle me on this because you know I'll win. I'll get a lawyer, a good one, who'll paint you as the emotionally distant husband who drove his wife to seek affection elsewhere. The courts will sympathize with me, especially when they hear how boring and neglectful you've been. The silence that followed was deafening. 8 years of shared dreams, shared struggles, shared love, all of it crumbling into dust before my eyes. "So what happens now?" I asked quietly. "Now you decide what's more important to you, your wounded pride or your family. You can accept that I need something more than what you're giving me, or you can lose everything trying to play the wounded hero." That night, I lay in our bed, the same bed where we'd made love countless times, where we'd held each other through good times and bad, and stared at the ceiling. Sarah slept peacefully beside me, as if she hadn't just threatened to destroy my entire world. But sleep wouldn't come for me. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard her words again. "I'll take everything. The boys, the house, everything you've worked for." The next morning, Sarah acted as if nothing had happened. She made breakfast for the boys, helped them get ready for school, kissed me goodbye as I left for work. The same routine we'd followed for years. But now it all felt like an elaborate charade, a performance put on for the benefit of Tyler and Brandon. At work, I went through the motions of my job, but my mind was elsewhere. I kept replaying the conversation, her threats, her casual dismissal of our marriage vows. Bob noticed my distraction and asked if the migraine was still bothering me, but I assured him I was fine. How could I tell him that my wife was destroying our family and threatening to take my children if I didn't accept her affair? During my lunch break, I sat in my truck in the Hayes Automotive parking lot and made a phone call I never thought I'd have to make. Marcus Walker had been a friend since high school, though our paths had diverged significantly since then. While I'd become a mechanic, Marcus had gone into what he diplomatically called problem resolution for various business interests around Dayton. I wasn't entirely sure what that meant, but I had a feeling he might be able to help me with my current situation. "Mike Thompson," Marcus said when he answered the phone. "Been a while, brother. What's going on?" "I need to talk to you, Marcus. Are you free for a drink after work?" "Sure thing. Murphy's Pub on 3rd Street, around 6. "I'll be there." Murphy's Pub was a typical working-class bar on Wayne Avenue in downtown Dayton, the kind of place where auto workers and factory guys went to unwind after a long day. Marcus was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth nursing a beer. He hadn't changed much since high school. Still built like the linebacker he'd been. Still had that sharp, calculating look in his eyes that had made opposing quarterbacks nervous. "Mike Thompson," he said, standing to clap me on the shoulder. "Damn good to see you, man, though you look like hell. What's eating at you?" I sat down across from him and ordered a beer, trying to figure out how to explain the situation without sounding like a complete fool. Marcus waited patiently, sipping his drink and studying my face with the same intensity he'd once used to read offensive plays. "It's Sarah," I finally said. "My wife. She's been seeing someone. Another man." Marcus's expression didn't change, but I could see him processing the information. "How do you know?" I told him about the migraine, about overhearing the conversation with Jessica, about Sarah's threats when I confronted her. Marcus listened without interruption, his face growing more serious as the story unfolded. "So she's cheating on you with some lawyer downtown, and when you called her on it, she threatened to take your kids and everything you've worked for if you don't just roll over and accept it? That's about the size of it." Marcus shook his head slowly. "That's cold, Mike. Even for someone in my line of work, that's ice cold. What kind of man does that make this lawyer? Going after a married woman with kids? His name is David Richardson. He's a junior associate at Lincoln Rice Homes. I know that firm. Bunch of white-collar types who think they're untouchable because they wear expensive suits and drive fancy cars. This Richardson probably thinks he's just having a good time with a bored housewife. No consequences for anybody. What am I supposed to do, Marcus? If I try to fight her in court, she'll probably win. She's right about that. I'm not a fighter, and she'll get a good lawyer who'll make me look like the bad guy. But I can't just stand by and let her destroy our family." Marcus leaned forward, lowering his voice. "You've got a few options here, Mike. You can roll over and let her walk all over you, which doesn't sound like something you can live with. You can lawyer up and hope for the best, but like you said, the odds aren't great. Or what? Or you can level the playing field a little. Make sure Mr. Richardson fully understands the situation he's gotten himself into." I stared at Marcus for a long moment. "What do you mean by that?" "I mean, sometimes people make better decisions when they have all the relevant information. This lawyer probably thinks he's just having some fun on the side. No harm, no foul. He might not fully appreciate that he's messing with a man's family, his life's work, his kid's future. Sometimes a little education can go a long way toward helping people make better choices." "What kind of education?" "The kind that opens people's eyes to the full scope of consequences for their actions. Nothing too serious, nothing permanent. Just a conversation that helps him understand that every choice has ramifications, and some of those ramifications might be more personal than he's considered." I felt my heart pounding in my chest. "And what would something like that cost? For an old friend? Consider it a favor. But Mike, you need to understand something. Once we go down this road, there's no going back. You're sure this is what you want?" I thought about Sarah's smug confidence when she'd threatened me. I thought about Tyler and Brandon, and what it would mean if I lost them. I thought about 8 years of marriage, 8 years of working my ass off to provide for my family, only to have it all thrown away because my wife was bored. Yeah, Marcus. I'm sure. All right then. Give me a day or two to set things up. Mr. Richardson is about to get a real education in how the world works outside his nice, safe law office. We finished our drinks and parted ways in the parking lot. As I drove home through the familiar streets of Dayton, I felt a mixture of anticipation and dread. I'd crossed a line tonight, stepped into a world I'd never imagined I'd be part of. But Sarah had forced my hand with her ultimatum. She'd made it clear that she was willing to destroy everything we'd built together, and she'd threatened to take my children from me. Well, now she was going to learn that even the most mild-mannered people have limits. The next day at work was torture. Every hour felt like 10, and I found myself watching the clock constantly, wondering when Marcus would make his move. I tried to focus on the transmission rebuild I was working on, but my mind kept wandering to what was happening downtown at the law office of Lincoln Rice Homes. That evening, I arrived home to find Sarah in an unusually good mood. She was humming as she prepared dinner, and she seemed more affectionate than she'd been in weeks. It made me sick to think that her improved mood was probably because she'd spent time with David Richardson earlier that day. But I played along, acting like the clueless husband she apparently thought I was. "Good day at work?" she asked as she set a plate in front of me. "Same as always. How was your day?" "Oh, the usual. Errands, housework, took care of the boys." She smiled at me, and for a moment, I almost believed that everything was normal between us. Then I remembered her threats from 2 nights earlier, and the illusion shattered. After dinner, we settled into our usual evening routine. Sarah helped Tyler and Brandon with their homework while I watched the news. It all felt so ordinary, so domestic, that I almost managed to forget about the storm that was brewing beneath the surface. Almost. Around 9 o'clock, after the boys were in bed, I was sitting in the living room reading the paper when my phone rang. I saw Marcus's name on the caller ID and felt my pulse quicken. "It's done," he said simply. "Lesson learned." What happened? Let's just say Mr. Richardson had an educational evening. He's currently at Memorial Hospital getting patched up and thinking real hard about his life choices. Don't worry, nothing serious, nothing permanent. Just enough to get his attention and help him understand the bigger picture. I felt a strange mixture of relief and guilt. Is he going to be all right? He'll be fine. Might be a little sore for a few days, but he'll recover. More importantly, he's gained a new perspective on the risks involved in messing around with other men's wives. I expect you'll be hearing from him soon. What do you mean? I mean, he's probably going to want to have a conversation with your wife about ending their little arrangement. Funny how a little reality check can change a man's priorities. The call ended, and I sat there staring at the phone. It was done. David Richardson had been given a harsh lesson in consequences, and now I had to wait and see how Sarah would react when her perfect little affair came crashing down around her. I didn't have to wait long. The next evening, as I was playing with Tyler and Brandon in the living room, Sarah's phone rang. She answered it in the kitchen, but I could hear her side of the conversation through the doorway. "David? Thank God. I've been worried about you. You haven't returned my calls." "What? What do you mean you can't see me anymore? What happened? Are you all right?" There was a long pause, and I could see Sarah's face changing as she listened to whatever David was telling her. "I don't understand. Yesterday everything was fine, and now you're... What? What kind of accident? David, you're scaring me." Another pause, and then Sarah's voice became sharp with panic. "What do you mean someone approached you? Who? What did they say? David, talk to me." But apparently, David had hung up, because Sarah stared at the phone for a moment before slowly setting it down. When she came back into the living room, her face was pale and confused. "That was David," she said, sitting down heavily in her chair. "He says he can't see me anymore. He said he was in some kind of accident, but he wouldn't explain what happened. He sounded scared, Mike. Really scared. I looked up from the blocks I was building with Brandon, doing my best to look concerned and innocent. That's terrible. I hope he's okay. Maybe he realized that what you two were doing was wrong and decided to end it. Sarah studied my face carefully, and I could see the wheels turning in her head. Mike, you wouldn't. Wouldn't what, Sarah? I've been here with you and the boys all evening, same as every evening. I was at work earlier, same as always. I don't even know this David person, remember? You're the one who's been keeping secrets. But something in my tone must have penetrated, because her expression shifted from confusion to suspicion to growing fear. We need to talk, she said quietly. After we put the boys to bed, Sarah and I sat across from each other in our living room, the same room where we'd celebrated birthdays and Christmas mornings, where we'd talked about our dreams for the future. Now it felt like a battlefield. I know who he is, I said without preamble. David Richardson, junior associate at Lincoln Rice Homes. I know about your meetings, probably more meetings than I even want to think about. Sarah's face went white. How could you possibly know that? The same way I know that you told Jessica you'd never give up what you have with him. The same way I know that you threatened to take my children and destroy my life if I didn't just roll over and accept your affair like a good little cuckold. Mike, let me explain. No explanations, Sarah. No justifications. You made your position perfectly clear. You threatened me. You threatened to take Tyler and Brandon away from me. You calculated that I was too nice, too passive, too weak to fight back. You thought you could have your cake and eat it too. Keep your safe, comfortable life with me while getting your thrills with him. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at our neighborhood, our life, everything that was about to change forever. You made one crucial mistake, though. You backed me into a corner. When you threaten a man's children, when you threaten to take away everything he's worked for, you'd better be prepared for him to fight back. Even the nicest people have limits, Sarah. Even people who've spent their whole lives avoiding confrontation will fight when their backs are against the wall. Sarah's voice was smaller now, less confident than it had been 2 nights ago. What are you saying? I'm saying that David Richardson has decided he doesn't want to see you anymore. He's come to understand that messing around with married women, especially married women with children, carries risks he's not prepared to handle. He'll be returning any personal items you might have left with him, and I strongly suggest you don't try to contact him again. You did something to him. It wasn't a question anymore. I protected my family, Sarah. You made it clear that you were willing to destroy our marriage, take my children, and ruin my life for the sake of your affair. So I made sure that David understood the full implications of his involvement with you. He's learned that every action has consequences, and sometimes those consequences are more personal than people expect. Sarah stood up abruptly, anger flashing in her eyes. You can't just have people beaten up, Mike. This isn't some gangster movie. There are laws against what you've done. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Laws? You want to talk to me about laws? What about the law that says when you get married, you promise to forsake all others? What about the moral law that says you don't destroy families for your own selfish pleasure? You want to hide behind laws now, after you've broken every promise you ever made to me. Sarah opened her mouth to respond, then seemed to think better of it. For the first time in this entire ordeal, she appeared to realize that she wasn't in control of the situation anymore. What happens now? She asked quietly. Now we deal with the consequences of your choices. I'll be filing for divorce citing adultery. There won't be any spousal support for you. You can get a job like everyone else. Child support for Tyler and Brandon will be provided according to state guidelines. But if you want anything beyond the bare necessities, you'll have to work for it. You can't do this to me. I'll fight you. I'll take everything, just like I promised I would. With what lawyer, Sarah? Your boyfriend is out of the picture, and I doubt his firm wants to get involved in this mess once they understand the full circumstances. Any other attorney you hire will be fighting an uphill battle against documented evidence of your affair and your threats against our family. How do you think that's going to play in front of a family court judge? The fight seemed to drain out of her all at once. She sank back into her chair, staring at the floor. I never meant for it to go this far, she whispered. But it did go this far, Sarah. You made choices. You chose to have an affair. You chose to threaten me when I confronted you about it. You chose to try to manipulate me into accepting a situation that no decent person should ever have to tolerate. Every choice has consequences. I headed toward the hallway, then paused and turned back to look at her one more time. You know what the saddest part is? If you had shown even a shred of remorse, if you had been willing to end the affair and work on our marriage, we might have found a way through this. But instead, you chose to declare war on me. You chose to threaten my children. You chose to see me as an enemy instead of a husband who loved you. That choice is going to cost you everything. As I headed upstairs to pack some clothes, I could hear Sarah crying behind me, but her tears came too late. The woman who had threatened to take my children and destroy my life was finally learning that actions have consequences, and that sometimes the quietest people, when pushed far enough, can push back harder than anyone expects. The next few days were a blur of legal consultations and difficult conversations. I explained to Tyler and Brandon, in terms they could understand, that Mommy and Daddy were going to be living in different houses for a while. They took it better than I had expected, probably because they were too young to fully grasp what was happening. Sarah, meanwhile, tried desperately to contact David Richardson, but her calls went unanswered. When she finally gave up and tried to hire another lawyer, she discovered that word had somehow spread through the legal community about her situation. Apparently, most attorneys in Dayton weren't eager to get involved in a case where adultery was clearly established and the opposing party had connections to people who solved problems in unconventional ways. 3 weeks after that fateful evening when I overheard Sarah's conversation with Jessica, I was loading my truck with the last of my belongings from our house on Maple Ridge Drive. I'd found a decent apartment across town, close enough that Tyler and Brandon could easily visit me on weekends. Sarah stood in the doorway watching me pack. She looked older somehow, worn down by the stress and the realization that her carefully planned life had imploded around her. Her face was puffy from crying, her hair unwashed. She looked like a stranger. "Mike," she called as I was about to drive away for the last time. "I'm sorry. I really am sorry. I never wanted it to end like this." I looked at her for a long moment. This woman who had been my everything for 8 years, who had given me 2 beautiful sons, who had shared my dreams and my bed and my future. But the woman I had loved was gone, replaced by someone who had been willing to threaten my children to protect her affair. "I know you're sorry now, Sarah, but sorry doesn't undo the choices you made. Sorry doesn't take back the threats you made against our family. You taught me an important lesson about how small things can destroy big things. You were right about that. You just didn't realize that your affair was one of those small things, and our marriage was the big thing it was going to destroy." As I drove away from the house we had bought together, the house where we had planned to raise our children and grow old together, I felt a complex mixture of sadness and relief. The marriage was over, but the war was won. Sarah would have to live with the consequences of her choices, and Tyler and Brandon would grow up understanding that actions have consequences. Even for adults, even for people we love. In my rearview mirror, I could see Sarah standing in the doorway of what used to be our dream house, watching me disappear down Maple Ridge Drive for the last time as her husband. She had gambled everything on her ability to manipulate me into accepting her betrayal, and she had lost everything. David Richardson had learned that some married women come with complications he wasn't prepared to handle. And I had learned that sometimes the quietest people, when pushed to their absolute limit, are capable of protecting what's theirs in ways that change everything. The small blood vessel in my brain that had triggered that migraine was just a tiny thing, barely visible under a microscope. But it had set in motion a chain of events that exposed the rot in my marriage and forced me to confront truths I had been too comfortable to see. Sometimes it really is the smallest things that determine the fate of our most significant endeavors. As I drove toward my new life, toward an uncertain but honest future, I couldn't help thinking that maybe, just maybe, that little blood vessel had actually saved me. It had given me the truth I needed to see, even though that truth had cost me everything I thought I wanted. But sometimes the truth, no matter how painful, is exactly what we need to set us free. The legal proceedings that followed were more complex than I had initially anticipated. Sarah's first attorney, a young graduate from the University of Dayton, withdrew from the case after what he described as ethical conflicts of interest. Her second attorney, an older man from Kettering, lasted 3 weeks before citing irreconcilable differences with his client's approach to the proceedings. It wasn't until her third attorney, a woman named Patricia Morris who specialized in difficult divorce cases, that Sarah found someone willing to represent her fully. But by then, the damage was already done. Marcus had been thorough in his documentation, and several witnesses had come forward with information about Sarah's behavior during our marriage that I hadn't even known about. Apparently, David Richardson wasn't her first affair. Jessica Martinez, feeling guilty about her role in keeping Sarah's secrets, had provided a detailed statement to my attorney about conversations dating back nearly 2 years. There had been others before David, a personal trainer at the fitness center downtown, a substitute teacher at Tyler and Brandon's school, even a delivery driver who regularly serviced our neighborhood. Each revelation felt like another knife twisting in my heart, but it also strengthened my resolve. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment or a cry for attention. This was a pattern of behavior that went to the core of who Sarah had become. The woman I had married 8 years ago, if she had ever really existed, was long gone. The custody hearing was the most difficult day of my life. Sitting in that sterile courtroom in the Montgomery County Courthouse in downtown Dayton, listening to lawyers argue about my children's future, watching Sarah try to paint herself as the victim of an abusive husband. It took every ounce of self-control I possessed not to stand up and scream the truth for everyone to hear. But Patricia Morris was good at her job. She painted me as a controlling husband who had resorted to violence when he discovered his wife's perfectly natural desire for emotional fulfillment outside their stagnant marriage. She brought in character witnesses who testified about Sarah's devotion to her children, her volunteer work at their school, her involvement in community activities. For a while, I thought I might lose everything after all. But then my attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Catherine Wells who had been practicing family law in Dayton for over 20 years, presented our evidence. The recorded phone calls between Sarah and David, which Marcus had somehow obtained. Security footage from the hotel downtown where they had met regularly. Credit card receipts for expensive dinners and gifts that Sarah couldn't explain. Most damning of all, a series of text messages between Sarah and Jessica where Sarah had explicitly discussed her plans to take Mike for everything he's worth if he ever discovered her affairs. When Tyler and Brandon were called to speak with the family court counselor, their responses were heartbreaking in their simplicity. They loved both their parents, but they felt more secure and stable when they were with me. They described coming home from school to find Mommy, upset and crying a lot, but being unable to explain why. They talked about the times when Mommy had left them with babysitters while she went out for important meetings that lasted until late at night. The final blow came when the court counselor asked them directly about their living situations. Tyler, my brave 8-year-old son, looked the counselor straight in the eye and said, "When Daddy picks us up on Friday, we know he's going to be there all weekend. When we're with Mommy, sometimes she has to go out for work stuff and we stay with Mrs. Bennett again." Sarah's face crumpled when she heard that testimony. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I saw genuine shame in her eyes. But it was too late for shame. Too late for regret. Too late for the apologies that came pouring out during the final recess. The judge's ruling was more favorable than I had dared to hope. Primary custody of Tyler and Brandon would be mine, with Sarah receiving supervised visitation every other weekend and 1 evening per week. She would pay child support based on her income from the insurance office, and there would be no spousal support. The house on Maple Ridge Drive would be sold, with the proceeds split equally between us. Most importantly, the judge included specific language in the custody order about Sarah's need to maintain a stable living environment and to avoid introducing the children to romantic partners without court approval. It was a polite way of saying that her dating life would be subject to judicial oversight until the boys turned 18. As we walked out of the courthouse that gray November afternoon, Sarah caught up with me on the steps. "Mike, please," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know I made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but we can still work this out. We can still be a family. The boys need both their parents." I stopped and looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in months. She was thinner than she'd been during our marriage, her face drawn and aged by stress. Her clothes, while professional, were clearly from discount stores rather than the boutiques where she used to shop. The woman who had once threatened to take everything from me now looked like she had lost everything herself. "Sarah," I said quietly, "we were never really a family. We were just two people pretending to be something we weren't, and you were pretending harder than I ever realized. The boys will always have both their parents, but we'll never be a family again. You made sure of that when you chose your affairs over our marriage." I was scared, Mike. Scared of getting old. Scared of being boring, scared of being trapped. I made awful choices because I was scared. We were all scared, Sarah. That's what being an adult means. Being scared and doing the right thing anyway. You chose to betray everything we built together rather than talk to me about your fears. You chose to threaten our children's security rather than face the consequences of your actions. Fear doesn't excuse what you did. Sarah started to cry then, the kind of desperate, hopeless crying that comes when someone finally understands the full scope of what they've lost. But I felt nothing watching her tears. The man who would have moved heaven and earth to comfort his wife was gone, replaced by someone harder and more practical. "I hope you find whatever it was you were looking for," I said, turning to walk away. "But you won't find it at our expense anymore." 6 months later, I was settled into my new routine. Tyler and Brandon spent every weekend with me, and we had developed new traditions that had become the highlights of our weeks. Saturday morning breakfast at Maggie's Diner downtown, where the waitresses knew our names and always brought extra syrup for the boys' pancakes. Afternoon trips to Hills and Dales Park, where we'd feed the ducks and play on the playground equipment until the sun started to set. Evening movies on my couch with homemade popcorn and the boys curled up on either side of me, arguing about what to watch next. They seemed to be adjusting well to the changes, better than I had dared to hope. Tyler had joined the school's soccer team and was thriving under the structure and camaraderie. Brandon had discovered a love for building things and spent hours with me in my small workshop behind the apartment, learning to use tools and create simple projects. Both boys were seeing a counselor once a week, just to make sure they had a safe space to process everything that had happened, but their reports were consistently positive. Sarah had finally found steady work at a local insurance office, barely making ends meet in a small apartment across town. She had visitation rights with the boys, of course, but the courts had been surprisingly unsympathetic to her pleas for more time or reduced child support obligations once the full story came out. Adultery, it turned out, still mattered in Ohio family courts, especially when combined with documented threats against the other spouse and evidence of a pattern of deceptive behavior. Her supervised visits were conducted at a neutral location, a family service center downtown that specialized in difficult custody situations. A social worker was present for every interaction, taking notes and filing reports with the court. The boys tolerated these visits, but they never showed the same excitement about seeing their mother that they displayed when I picked them up from school on Fridays. I tried not to take satisfaction in Sarah's reduced circumstances, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't feel like justice. The woman who had threatened to take everything from me was now living paycheck to paycheck, dealing with the consequences of choices she'd made when she thought she held all the cards. I never saw David Richardson again, though I heard through the grapevine that he had taken a position with a firm in Cincinnati shortly after his educational experience. Apparently, he had decided that Dayton wasn't the right fit for his career aspirations. Marcus had mentioned, during one of our occasional drinks, that David had been very cooperative in providing certain recordings and documentation that had proven useful during the divorce proceedings. Fear, it seemed, had a way of clarifying people's priorities. Word had somehow gotten around about what happened to people who involved themselves with married women in ways that threatened children's stability. Dayton wasn't a huge city, and certain messages had a way of spreading through the appropriate networks. Marcus and I still met occasionally at Murphy's Pub, though we never talked directly about that night when everything changed. Some stories are better left in the past, some debts better left unacknowledged. He'd ask about the boys, I'd ask about his business, and we'd drink our beers and watch whatever game was on the television above the bar. "You look good, Mike," he said during one of our recent meetings. "Lighter, somehow. Like you've been carrying around a weight you didn't even know was there." He was right, though I hadn't thought about it that way. For years, I'd been living with a constant underlying anxiety that I couldn't quite name. I'd attributed it to work stress or financial pressure, or just the normal worries that came with raising children. But now I understood that it had been the weight of living a lie, maintaining a marriage with someone who fundamentally didn't respect me or the life we'd built together. As for me, I was learning to be content with my new life. It wasn't the future I had planned 8 years ago when I married Sarah, but it was honest. It was mine. And increasingly, I was discovering that was enough. Initially, I had rented a small apartment that was comfortable enough, with a good school district and a workshop space where I could tinker with engines and teach the boys basic mechanical skills. I'd started taking on some side work, friends and neighbors bringing me their cars for repairs, and word was spreading that Mike Thompson did good work at fair prices. Bob Hayes had hinted that there might be an opportunity for me to buy into Hayes Automotive as a partner within the next few years, a chance to build something that would be truly mine. After the house on Maple Ridge Drive sold and the divorce was finalized, my share of the proceeds had allowed me to put a down payment on a small house closer to the boys' school. It wasn't as grand as our former home, but it was ours, truly ours, and that made all the difference. I'd even started dating again, carefully and slowly. A woman named Rachel Morrison, a nurse at Dayton Children's Hospital, had struck up a conversation with me at Tyler's soccer game. Her son played on the same team, and we'd gradually moved from sideline small talk to coffee dates while the boys practiced. She was divorced too, understood the complexities of building new relationships while raising children, and had shown remarkable patience with my cautiousness about introducing new people into Tyler and Brandon's lives. "You don't have to protect them from the idea that you might be happy again," Rachel had said gently after I'd explained my hesitation about having her over for dinner. "Kids are more resilient than we think, and they want their parents to be happy. As long as you're thoughtful about it, they'll adjust." She was right, of course. Tyler and Brandon had taken to Rachel immediately, drawn to her easy laugh and genuine interest in their lives. She brought a warmth and stability that had been missing for too long. The weight of small things, a tiny blood vessel, an inhaler left at home, an overheard conversation, had changed everything. Maybe that was how life was supposed to work. Maybe everything important happened in the small choices we made when we thought nobody was watching. I was a different man now than I had been when this all started back in October. Harder in some ways, but more honest about who I was and what I was willing to accept. I had learned that even the gentlest people have limits, and that sometimes protecting what you love requires you to become someone you never thought you could be. The marriage was over. The old life was gone. But Tyler and Brandon were thriving, and I was learning to build a future based on truth rather than comfortable lies. As I tucked the boys into their beds in our new house, listening to their excited chatter about the soccer tournament next weekend, I realized I was genuinely happy for the first time in years. Not fake happiness, but real satisfaction from living honestly and protecting what truly matters. Sarah would always be part of our lives as the boys' mother, but she was no longer part of my story except as a cautionary tale. Her supervised visits continued, and the boys maintained a polite but distant relationship with her. The tiny blood vessel that had caused my migraine that October day was still there, still occasionally causing problems. But I'd learned to manage it better, just like I'd learned to manage everything else life had thrown at me. Sometimes the smallest things really do change everything, and sometimes that change is exactly what we need. Thank you for your viewing. See you next time. If you enjoyed this, subscribe to JK Tells a Story for more tales.